used before. All of the books you'll hear about today are right here, and you can check them out at the end of the event and have them over break to read. So, and if someone beats you to one and you still want to check it out, you can always, when you get home tonight, you can put it on hold, and you'll get an excellent email when it gets returned, and we'll put it on hold for you and come and pick it up then. And many people can put the same thing on hold, and it'll just go through the whole line, just in case you're worried. Also, if this looks like so much fun and you want to be a rapid reviewer next spring, just let me know, either at the end of the event while we're all milling around, or just send me an email, because I'm always looking for volunteers. And just a note to everybody, but mostly to you guys. So I'm going to put a little timer on, and it will go off after a minute. But feel free to finish whatever thought you're in the middle of. I'm not going to shut you down at exactly a minute. Right. Okay. So this is Marlborough, so everyone probably knows one another. But let me introduce the reviewers for this semester: Jaime Tanner and Casey Friedman, Molly Booth, Jack Rossiter-Munley, and Travis Trumbly. And one of the things we've started doing is giving each reviewer a chance in the beginning to just briefly say any thoughts you had about the collection of books you ended up choosing, or if you had anything in mind when you were choosing the books. This is something that Bob Engel asked me to start when he was a rapid reviewer, because he wanted a chance to say something about the collection of books. So, and if you don't have anything to add about that, that's fine too. So Jamie, do you have any thoughts about the collection?
I wish I could say that there was some kind of pattern that I used, but it's kind of a random assortment of books that just kind of popped into my head, and then a couple that are a little bit nepotistic, because they're written by family members. But
it doesn't mean you don't like them.
Yeah, they're good books. I believe in them.
Right, right.
Yeah, I also do not have a unifying theme. I tried to pick out books that people were unlikely to have come across. A little eccentric and eclectic in the selection. I'm just noticing that Europe plays a prominent role in my selection of books. I don't know why that would be. But there you go.
My books are all kind of, a lot of them are books that I've loved for a really long time, and some of them are newer books, but most of them have some element of humor in them, because I picked books that I would want to read over winter break to get a break from textbooks. So,
I had a very particular scientific and robot-like choosing methodology, which was books I love. And that's about it.
Good job, Jack. Jack apparently loves a total of 6 books.
Yep.
He's an anti-intellectual.
They're the only books I've ever read.
He's a senior on plan. I have some books that are about mountains, and some books that are fantasy, and some books that are realistic nonfiction, and some comic books, or comic strips, I should say. Just a wide assortment of books that either in my past, in high school, or present are important to me, and things that I think the college should own.
Excellent. Cool. All right, so we'll start, and just, I forgot to mention, we're just going to go straight down this list. These are alphabetical by the author's last name, and we're just going to go straight down them, and we'll be done in about 40 minutes. All right, so who's first here? Casey is going to start us out. Whenever you're ready.
My first book is not about Europe. It is Isaac Asimov's Treasury of Humor, which is a collection of jokes I grew up with on my bookshelf, and one day opened it up and was enchanted by it. I like joke books because I like opening books up to the middle. But these are especially good for reading because they are long-form jokes, in which, for instance, the ethnic identity of the characters is given away by their names. They begin, Moskowitz and Finkelstein were talking about their insurance one day, or whatever it may be. And I also am enchanted by it because it is from a different era than my own. Isaac Asimov wrote things for a living. He wrote a lot of things. And so he was really good at articulating certain things about the era in which he lived. He talks about his participation in women's liberation and some of the cruel snipes he made at other participants.
If you don't have a list in front of you, the next 3 books are from me, so we're about to go on a little journey together. We're going to start off with a book that I actually almost exclusively listen to as a book on tape, but that costs a lot of money to purchase, so if you feel really motivated, go hunt it down, because the narrator, Kate Forbes, has a wonderful voice. It's very soothing. But this book is from a series. It's about cats and people who solve mysteries together. It is written by Rita Mae Brown and her cat, Sneaky Pie Brown, equally credited in smaller letters, though I assume the cat does more of the work, just based on how much the cats talk in the book, and yeah, that happens. So I highly recommend it. It's fun, it's interesting, and there are also substantive conversations that occur between the characters within the book that make it much more than a mystery. Next, the mammoth book of the world's greatest chess games. I have, for almost as long as I can remember, loved the game of chess. Something about it when I was young really captured my imagination. It may have been the pieces, it may have been what I started reading about it, it may have been the software I had on my computer. I'm not sure. But this book contains within it games that will make you suddenly understand that chess is also art, and that geniuses who play it can do things that look absolutely magical on a board. They can somehow, in their heads, understand everything that's going on in such a way that allows them to move all of their opponent's pieces to the other side of the board through a forced series of moves. You can watch somebody sacrifice almost all of their pieces and still win in like 13 moves. It's astounding. And I personally love playing through these games because you can put yourself in the head of somebody much smarter than you, and that's always a treat. And you can also, you know, I mean, I can't even, yeah. I'm also going to have to resist checking that out. Yeah. This book is My Antonia by Willa Cather, which is sort of one of my all-time favorite classics, and I can't say much about it, but because I want you all to read it, I'm going to read a small piece of it to you, and hopefully that will make you want to read the rest of it. This is when the main character, Jim, is heading out west. This entire book is his recollections of his childhood based on what the name Antonia reminds him of, who was this sort of dynamic person he knew when he was young. No, there was nothing but land, slightly undulating. I knew because often our wheels ground against the brake as we went down into a hollow and lurched up again on the other side. I had the feeling that the world was left behind, that we had got over the edge of it, and were outside man's jurisdiction. I had never looked up at the sky when there was not a familiar mountain range against it. But this was the complete dome of heaven, all that there was of it. I did not believe that my dead father and mother were watching me from up there. They would still be looking for me at the sheepfold down by the creek or along the white road that led to the mountain pastures. I had left even their spirits behind me.
Great. My first book is Firebringer by David Clement Davies, and it's great that it's first because it's definitely the dorkiest book that I have in this stack. It's about deer, and it's slightly anthropomorphic, so if you like books like that, you'll probably enjoy this. It's akin to Watership Down, so if you like that, you'll like this. It's kind of more adult, and it's a lot darker, even though Watership Down is already pretty dark. But it's about a deer. There's a prophecy about him, and he's supposed to overthrow the evil deer lord, and he can speak to animals and stuff. It's really, I'm making it sound really lame, but in fact, it's really, really freaking awesome, and you should read it. So, that's mine.
My first book is What is the What? David Eggers seems to be a perennial Rapid Reviews favorite, and I told myself I wouldn't review him, and then I lied to myself. It is a phenomenal book about a Sudanese lost boy before the Sudanese, or during the first Sudanese Civil War. There were tons of Sudanese children who walked across the entire south of Sudan from west to east to get into Ethiopia, where then they were in refugee camps and maltreated, and then walked back across Ethiopia, back across Sudan to get to Kenya, where they got into different refugee camps. It's a heart-wrenching tale of one man's personal struggle through all of this, and he tells it part from his time in America with flashbacks to how that related to his time in Sudan and how the things he was experiencing in America weren't much better than the things he was experiencing in Sudan, in this war-torn nation. It's completely heart-wrenching and at the same time very uplifting. Phenomenal, phenomenal book.
Oh, it's me. Okay, so this first book on my list is Middlesex, and I assume that a lot of people have heard about it because it's a very popular, fairly recent book, but I wanted to put it on here just in case people hadn't heard about it because I think it's so great and it would be a great vacation read. Jeffrey Eugenides I'm a big fan of his work. He also wrote The Virgin Suicides, which I would also recommend. And this book is written as a memoir, although it is not a memoir, and it's really a coming-of-age story that deals with the family of this individual who are Greek immigrants. So it really talks about their, it's kind of a historical story about the family coming to the States. And it's also kind of a story of development, coming of age, puberty story, but there's a twist. It's about an intersex individual who was born with female characteristics, and then later at puberty they realize that they're actually more male characteristics, or more anatomically male, and so it's a funny, interesting, kind of creative story.
And I have that on disc if anyone wants to. It's a fabulous read.
My second book is the first of my mountain trilogy. This is self-rescue for anyone who does anything involving ropes, climbing, mountaineering, caving. This is a must-read. It teaches you how to save your ass in any number of situations, or how to save your partner's ass when they get themselves in over their head. And anyone who's doing any sort of mountaineering or climbing, even if it's simple like top rope climbing, should know the things that this book has to teach you. It's nice and short. There's lots of these great visuals, and it has just lots of great information that is kind of like one of the Bibles that sits on my shelf of climbing books. And it ties nicely into two of the other books I have with me. Oh, it's me again. Hi. Switching from mountains to fantasy, this was the first ever adult fantasy book I read. Previous to this, I'd only read young adult literature. It's called Magician Apprentice. It's by this author, Raymond Feist. This is apparently the author's preferred edition. It's a book it was the first book he ever wrote. He wrote it, and it was double this length. It was something like 300,000 words. And his editor said, "You will never get that published." So he split it into two and published it as two separate books. And it published, and it sold, and it went on to spur something like 20 or 25 books all in the same realm, all in the same universe with some of the same characters. It tells the story of a young magician, an orphan boy who comes to become the most powerful magician in the world, and his journey through everything great in fantasy. Foreign invaders, war, a charming rogue thief who becomes Duke of some place or other, I don't know. Kings, swords, sorcery, classic high fantasy.
Okay, so 3 in a row for me. So this is The Big Over Easy by Jasper Ford. Jasper Ford is one of my top 10 favorite writers. He does alternate universes, alternate worlds, but it's England basically. Except it's set in a time where nursery crimes are real and all the characters in them are real and they are criminals, so that's why it's a nursery crime. This is a series, so there's the fourth bear is after this one. This one's really funny. It's about the investigation of Humpty Dumpty. They find him shattered on the ground. They think it's a suicide, but then stuff starts to unfold and perhaps it was a murder. The lead detective is Jack Spratt and his partner is Mary, and Jasper Ford is just a really, really funny author. It's just ridiculous, so I would read it. Really, really excellent. So moving on from him, well actually not moving on from him, I have this first, sorry. Okay, so Jasper Ford, again, this is the next series that he wrote, and this is the first of another series called Thursday Next. So this is another alternate version of England where literature is kind of it kind of infiltrates reality more than it does in our reality, and it's like so highly prized that they have to have detectives to keep track of it. So in this book, Jane Eyre is stolen out of Jane Eyre. So they have to, the detective has to track her down and put her back in the book before too many people read this ridiculous non-narrative story. So it goes on to get even better as the series goes on, so that's a really good series to check out too. And then third is The Princess Bride. Probably a lot of you have seen this movie and maybe you've read the book. The book is just as good as the movie. I mean, the movie does a really, really good job. It's really good. But this is just even more. You get the background of like Inigo Montoya and Fezzik and the three evil people, and there's like this weird evil zoo and the albinos tree. It's very strange, but at the same time, it's really good. It's really wonderfully written, and there's just more fun scenes than there are in the movie.
Second in my mountain series is this book, Deep Survival. It's about who lives and who dies in survival situations. Things like car crashes as well as plane crashes in the Andes, such as the Alive situation, or when you're doing an alpine ascent in Central or South America and you fall and break your knee and you're 4 days out from your base camp. How does that person survive when so many people in similar situations die? It does a lot of the psychology, or it talks a lot about the psychology of survival situations and why sometimes Navy SEALs freeze even though they have tons of training, and a 6-year-old girl might not freeze because they're relying more on instincts. It's a phenomenal book that ties well in with self-rescue, because if you have those skills, then you might know how to apply them when you're in that situation. But just having the skills alone isn't enough. It's being calm and collected and cool, and surviving. And the author himself is an excellent survivalist himself, but that's explained throughout the book.
Okay, this is Nightlight, which is by the Harvard Lampoon. It's a parody of Twilight. So if you hate Twilight, you'll really like this, like I do. Probably the best part about this book is the Harvard Lampoon people wrote it in the style of Stephanie Meyer, meaning they took great pains to make it horrible. So the sentences are constructed horribly, but like in a really funny way. And it's really, really good. It mercilessly makes fun of Bella Swan, the lead character, as like this person who is not really even a person, because that's who she is. And Edward doesn't even like her, and she keeps pursuing him, and he may not be a vampire either, so it's really good.
Okay, so the next three are mine. First is Steppenwolf, which I read in college, and I don't think I've read it since college, but it was a favorite of mine at the time, and Herman Hesse in particular, I'm a big fan of his writing. I think his use of words is really beautiful and poetic. And Steppenwolf, it's kind of a blend between reality and fantasy. I guess it's kind of like magic realism, but in a very German, depressing kind of way. And it is a kind of autobiographical in terms of the time that Herman Hesse wrote this. It's a middle-aged man going through a midlife crisis and kind of exploring two parts of himself, the man side and the wolf side, and kind of unusual cast of characters that he meets along the way and some unusual experiences that he has. So that's Steppenwolf. The next two books are my nepotistic contribution here. So the first is Being Brett, which was written by my father-in-law. And he has written a few novels, but this is a memoir that is an account of the sickness and subsequent death of his oldest daughter, Brett, due to Hodgkin's disease. And I think it's a really powerful book in that it really explores what it means to be diagnosed with a terminal disease and all of the kind of different procedures that she had to go through and how her support system also dealt with it. So in one review I read about this, it said that it really highlights what it means to be alive, what it means to die, and what it means to be left behind. Smith College used this as a text in their death and dying course for many years, and so I think it's a really neat analysis of kind of what this experience is like. And the next book is a children's book. It's written by my husband, but it's a wonderful book. It's called Priscilla Superstar. I've obviously been thinking a lot about children's books lately, but I would be anyway, because in addition to my husband, his sister illustrated the book, he wrote it, and then his parents also have many children's books. But Priscilla is one of 4 in a series about Priscilla, this quirky little character. And this book, the message is really great. Priscilla is trying to get a new hobby, so she takes up rolleré, which is a combination of roller skating and ballet. And there's a big play, and she really wants to be the star, and she's practicing and practicing, and she wants to be the princess. And instead, she's given the role of the wind, and is really bummed out about this. And her best friend Bettina said, "Well, you really lucked out. I played the tree. I don't even get to move." It's rhyming text. It's really fun. And the illustrations are really great. Like, they don't just support the story, they really enhance it and add to it. And I just wanted to read the last page, because this really sums up what the message is. Priscilla was soaring, she felt like a star, and if that's how you feel, then that's what you are.
Aww. It's really cute. Okay, mine next is Dark Lord of Dirkholm, which is a very dark book. It's about this really scary tourist attraction run by this guy named Mr. Chesney, where he runs this kind of war reenactment every year, but the citizens of the town that he lives in actually have to reenact the war. So every year a lot of people die in this giant tourist attraction, and it's really, really disturbing. Anyway, so the main character in this book is chosen to be the Dark Lord that year, so he's supposed to be the bad guy and win this battle, but he decides he's going to rebel against the tourist attraction, so you kind of see what happens when he goes against him. It's a really, really good book.
All right. We are back to Europe with Postwar to Europe for the first time. Postwar, A History of Europe Since 1945 by Tony Jett. The New York Times Review of Books says this is an encyclopedia in scope with the pace of a thriller. And there is no better way for me to describe it. When I open it up, I inevitably read a chapter because I get so sucked in by the scholarship, which is well documented and deep, and the fact that this guy was traveling and living in many of the countries he writes about. He recites a lot of jokes in his footnotes, jokes that were current in Prague in 1968, or wherever it may be that he's talking about. And it conveys that the issues at hand touch on people's lives. He also does a really good job of being opinionated without being a polemicist, which I think is really valuable in a political work of history.
We'll stay in Europe and we'll sort of stay at war. Sorry. This is Sarajevo, Exodus of a City, which is one of my favorite nonfiction books I've read. It's basically it's a mixture of analysis and personal memoir and sort of lament by a guy living in Sarajevo, watching the city he loves be destroyed by violence, and his sort of reflections and analysis of what that city was and what it's turning into, and whether or not it will remain what it has been. And I see Colby looking at me quizzically because I know he's read it too, and I don't know if you would say something different, but
Not putting you on the spot or anything.
But I mean, for me at least, reading this book is sort of what I'd like to hope academics are able to do, is what I'd say.
Noting that Jack has only read 6 books and 3 of them are nonfiction, it's in his top 3 favorite nonfiction books. To go with the running joke. Or at least I'm running with it. My next book is Life of Pi by Jan Martel, or Jan Martel, I don't really know. Whatever. It is a cute little book. It's 318 pages long or something. The first 286 pages tell the story of a boy whose father and mother own a zoo in India, and they're moving the zoo from India to Canada where there's more need for zoos. So they pack up all the animals and they put them into a cargo ship, and they're shipping them across the ocean. And the ship hits an iceberg or something. I don't really know what it goes down to, but it sinks. And he ends up in a life raft with a zebra, an orangutan, possibly an orangutan, some sort of great ape, and a Bengal tiger. And he then has to manage to survive on this lifeboat with these 3 creatures. And he manages to get to Mexico. So the first 296 pages, or 286 pages, tell this wonderful, cute story. and then the next, what did I say, 319, the next 30 pages or so retell the story with a slight twist, and it takes it from a good book to a phenomenal book because it makes you rethink and reevaluate everything that just happened. Moving from young Indian boy in the Pacific Ocean to a Game of Thrones, you know, they're sort of the same in that things happen and there are characters. Game of Thrones, it's currently being made as an HBO series. You should read this before you watch that. I watched the first episode, it was great. Read this. It's great fantasy. The author has a penchant for killing off characters if they do dumb things, even sometimes if they don't do dumb things. But it has very realistic feels to actions having consequences, and it's 5 or 6 books long. The 6th book just came out, or 5th book just came out, I don't know, one of the two. But the story grows as it goes along, and it gets better and better. And the good and evil that you see in the first book, over the next 4 books change into, well, what was good and what is now evil, and I really don't know what's going on. And it's all very, very well told and phenomenally written, and a lot of fun.
My next book takes place in Europe. It is Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. I don't know if it's properly a coming-of-age novel because it charts the story of a whole childhood through a young adulthood, but it's one of 2 novels I read of that variety while I was depressed and lonely in Cambridge. The other one was David Copperfield. I didn't finish David Copperfield, but I finished this book, and I finished this book because it spoke deep truths to me about sort of the moral self-consciousness and discomfort with myself and my future and uncertainty over what I could be, the realities of things I want, but things that don't make me happy, being compelling addictions that I come back to time and again whenever the opportunity is presented. In short, it's a somewhat grim book in its tone and theme, but that was what made it really compelling. And when it ends on a philosophical and uplifting note, as Somerset Maugham books do, it was really meaningful to me.
This is a twisted little book. Cormac McCarthy's Child of God. If you've ever read anything by Cormac McCarthy, you know that he tends to kill his characters and have them just do really horrible things, but he'll always tell the story in some of the most beautiful English you'll ever read. I can't recommend this enough because I feel like he both reaches his lowest point in terms of what he has his characters do and his highest points in terms of how he tells you about what they're doing. And it's also really short, which is definitely an asset when you're reading his books, because if they're long, you will want to stop, and you probably will.
Oh, I'm up. Engrenage of the Siage series does not take place in Europe, but is French. And it is a Franco-Belgian comic book. It's very lushly illustrated. The story is that this young woman, Navis, is the only human known to a vast interstellar convoy, and that finds her on an abandoned planet, incorporates her into their service, and she becomes this special agent. And as the series progresses, this is the 3rd book in the series, as it progresses, more and more things about her past and the dark underlying politics of Siage, the convoy, become revealed. And it was just fascinating to me. I learned French from these books, from these comic books, and so they hold a special place in my heart.
Great. My next book is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. He's a Japanese author, and he's an absolutely beautiful writer. You may have heard of him from the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, which is and Kafka on the Shore, which are his 2 most famous books. But this is the first book I read by him, and it is a really beautiful book. It's kind of about this trio of friends, and one of them, before the book begins, commits suicide, and then the 2 characters left kind of have to deal with it, and one of them retreats further and further into herself, and the guy is pretty much just helpless. trying to get her out of it. Weirdly enough, it's a reason I came to Marlborough, because she goes to a treatment facility in the middle of the mountains, and it sounded really great. So, I know that's kind of strange, but it's a really beautiful book, and it also isn't very long either. It's less than 300 pages. So if you want a sample of Haruki Murakami, check that out.
Machine of Death is as morbid as the title suggests. It is inspired by a webcomic in which the premise for a book about a machine that will take a blood sample and tell you cryptically but with unerring accuracy how you will die plays out in the world. There are a vast number of short stories that play with this premise in different tones, different genres. They are almost all life-affirming in some very strange way. And they are largely concerned with fate in the ancient sense that leads to tragedy. My favorite story is called Torn Apart and Devoured by Lions. It is the most life-affirming short story I have ever read.
All right, and to keep it cheery, I have Death Note, which is a really great Japanese comic book. I'm not really into anime and manga culture as much as my sister is, but she gave me this book to read, and it's really, really good. It's about this high schooler who finds this book who, if he writes the name of somebody while picturing their face, he can kill anyone. And it kind of comes with this really hysterical death god who likes apples, so that's really funny too. And so the first book is him deciding kind of what he's going to do with it, and eventually decides he's going to become God and kill all the criminals, and it kind of really raises really interesting questions about the death penalty and things like that. So I would really recommend it. It's a very serious thing. And later there's a really cool detective, and most of the series is them playing like these really crazy mind games with each other, and it's really interesting. So that's that. And then this is Night Watch by Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett is my favorite author other than Shakespeare. He is absolutely amazing. His books are set in this place called Discworld, which is like Earth, except it is on the back of 4 elephants, which are in turn riding on a turtle through space. So that's the whole premise, but then you actually get to know the different cities and places in the Earth. And this is kind of a military-style book. It's set in Ankh-Morpork, which is the main city in this series. And the main character, Sam Vimes, is he's part of the Night Watch. He's the head of the Night Watch, and he's chasing this criminal and ends up going back in time, and so does the criminal. And he kind of has to figure out how to get back to the time he was in and also kill this guy before he kills anyone in that time period. And he also has to train himself as a younger commander. So lots of time jokes in it, and it's really, really, really fun. And Terry Pratchett is absolutely brilliant and has like so many books. So if you like that, there is plenty more of that came from.
I will second Terry Pratchett being amazing.
Yes.
I haven't read that one yet, but I'm on my way.
You should.
There's like 27 in the series. My next book is Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince. It's by Antoine Saint-Exupéry, and it was written in 1943 when he was living in America. He had come over to America shortly before then to try to convince America to get involved with the war, failing to do so. It is an adorably cute book that I first read when I was before I was a freshman in high school, and it has stuck with me for a long time. It has lots of great lessons about what it means to be an adult and how to still have fun, and why you shouldn't take yourself or anything else in life too seriously. But as well as messages about like what it means to tame something and that you're then responsible for it and taking care of it. And it has some really cute illustrations, and it's just an amazingly classic book that if you have not read, you should take the 45 minutes or 50 minutes it would take you to read the book and to really appreciate the message it has inside of it. Oh good, it's not me.
Okay, my next book is Primates Memoir, A Neuroscientist's Unconventional Life Among the Baboons by Robert Sapolsky. I can't say enough about this book. It's going to be hard to do this in a minute. But this book is written by Robert Sapolsky, who is a professor at Stanford. He studies endocrinology, or hormones and behavior. And he's one of these rare creatures that is a scientist who is also really funny and can write really well for the lay public. And this is a chronicle of his work studying baboons in the Masai Mara, which is actually where I did my work, and some of his study subjects would come and steal my toothbrush and shampoo bottles from my tent. And this book is basically gives you insight into the lives of baboons and also into the life of a young Jewish guy from New York as he tries to navigate doing work in Kenya, and all the trials and tribulations, which are pretty comical, that he goes through. You will definitely laugh out loud. One of the funniest moments in this book is when he talks about, you know, being away from human contact for a long time. He begins to fantasize about the Volkswagen-sized breasts of elephants walking past. So you will laugh out loud, you'll also cry, and you'll learn.
My next book is Blindness by José Saramago. He is a Portuguese Nobel Prize winning author. This is one of the books he's credited with for winning the Nobel Prize. It's a story about the depth of darkness as well as the beauty that can happen among humans. It tells the story of a blindness epidemic that goes through a unknown city or unnamed city, where suddenly very, very few people can see, and the government, you know, crumbles and falls apart and tries to quarantine it to stop the spread of this epidemic. And in these more or less camps, jails, whatever you want to call them, where all of the inmates are blind except this one woman who for some reason doesn't go blind, you witness really, really dark, disturbing, disgusting things that people will do when they think no one can see. But you'll also witness things of amazing beauty that people do when no one is watching. And it's an amazingly beautiful and hard book to read.
The Pleasantries of the Incredible Mullah Nazarene by the somewhat academically dishonest popularizer of Sufi wisdom, Idris Shah, is not difficult to read. It is a collection of a number of short little passages that are almost jokes. In fact, some of them are the same jokes as appear in Asimov's joke book. But some of them are a lot less funny and a lot more provocative, or just make you read them and you think, what did I just read? They feature largely the Mullah Nazarene and his donkey, as well as his wife, and a number of wags of the village who come to him with points of wisdom that he rebuts or otherwise gives the lie to.
This book speaks for itself. I encourage you to look at the cover because it is all there. Songs by Bruce Springsteen. It is a collection of the lyrics to his songs with commentary from the artist. My own personal feelings about Bruce Springsteen aside, you will find very few popular musicians who think so carefully about their own work, both before they produce it and then afterwards. And it's interesting to see him reflect on sort of where he was with early albums. And if you're a fan of his second album, that is the only one that doesn't come with lyrics, so you might want that.
Okay, my next book is The Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. I'm not really sure why I put this on. It just kind of like popped into my head as I was thinking of books. I didn't know how familiar people would be with it. I had never heard of it, and then I found it in when I was in Kenya. There's a few days where it was raining and we were stuck in camp, and I found this book and read it in a few days. And it's a really funny book in an odd kind of way. It was a cult classic for a long time. The author actually wrote this in his 30s, and he committed suicide, and it was published posthumously. But the main character of this book is this kind of sloth-like guy who is really misanthropic and really kind of negative, but also hypocritical in his criticism of everyone else, and it kind of follows him as he tries to get a job and has all these different misadventures. And it's a pretty lengthy book, but it's very amusing.
the last in my Mountain trilogy, No Shortcuts to the Top, which I'm sure this guy has read both of the other two books, so you should too. This is Ed Visters. He's the first American to climb the 14 highest summits in the world, all the mountains that are over 8,000 meters, including such classics as Everest and K2, but not forgetting Annapurna, for whom my cat is named. And this tells the story of how he did it. What his motto is that getting to the top is optional, getting back down is mandatory, which a lot of people in mountaineering don't do. And throughout the book, you meet all these other people who are trying to do the same thing, and you come back to them 4 or 5 chapters later, and they've died because they do dumb things on the mountains. And he doesn't. He survived. He made it to the top and back. And it's just his story. He wrote it with help from David Roberts. And it's a really great read because it talks about like what it took for him to conquer what 15 or 20 other people in the world have ever done. Moving on to my last book, The Complete Collection of Calvin and Hobbes. This is the book that I thought the library doesn't have this, and dear God, why don't they have this? From November 18th, 1985 through December 31st, 1995, it was a glorious time to be alive, because every day you could look forward to reading a new Bill Watterson comic, chronicling the journeys of Calvin and his pet tiger Hobbes, through making ridiculous snowmen, to having a transmogrifier, whatever we talked about earlier today. What the glory of a cardboard box can be. And it's just great. If you have not read them, you should. You don't need to read them in order, but you can. They're all right here. However many comics it is, in beautiful color, in a wonderful hardbound edition. Not that I'm a salesman, but buy this for yourself because it is among the best purchases you'll ever make in your life.
David Weber's On Basilisk Station, the first installment of the Honor Harrington saga, is in fact about Europe. It is about the Napoleonic Wars in space.
That's not Europe.
The Star Kingdom, the political entity around which the story revolves, is the Star Kingdom of Manticore, a constitutional monarchy with prosperity beyond its small size would predict because of its control of the Manticore Wormhole Junction. It is menaced by the People's Republic of Haven, an expanding welfare military imperium that is headed, beginning partway through this book, by a fellow named Rob S. Pierre. Is back. And it continues on. It's a take on C.S. Forester's Horatio Hornblower series. Longer, more character development, worse characters developed. But nonetheless, a book part of a series I happily return to every time I get the chance.
Okay, my last book is The Beak of the Finch by Jonathan Wiener. I always really appreciate when writers are able to convey science to the lay public in a really fascinating, interesting, and clear way, and that's what this book does. This weaves 2 stories, one of Darwin's realization of this theory of natural selection, how he came to that realization and the theory and all the work he put into it before he revealed it to the rest of the world. And that interweaves it with the research of Peter and Rosemary Grant, who are both professors at Princeton University, and basically follows their research in the Galapagos on Galapagos finches over the past 20 or 30 years, and their actual documentation of evolution as it is occurring. I didn't realize it at the time that I put this on the list, but Bob Engel, who's teaching biology for me in the spring, is using this as one of the texts for biology. So it's a really fantastic book.
Well, that was perfect. Okay, and to wrap things up, we have Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters. Now, if you've probably heard of the other parody of this, which is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but I assure you that this one is way better. I mean, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is really good, but this one is really, really, really good. So basically, if you don't know the premise of these books, is someone takes Jane Austen's original writing and kind of spices it up and puts in some sort of ridiculous element. So sea monsters are in this one. So instead of Willoughby like just saving Marianne from a hill, he saves her by killing an octopus that's trying to like suck her into a hole. And Colonel Brandon isn't just old and like kind of boring. Marianne doesn't like him because he's got tentacles like all over his face. And the entire world is about to be compromised by this giant attack of sea monsters. At one point they go and stay, instead of like in a summer home, they stay underwater in this big dome. And it's really funny because sorry, the author does this really funny thing where it's like people are dying outside and being killed by sea monsters like the scuba divers, and everyone's still trying to be really polite at the ball and like ignoring the fact that these people are getting killed by squid. So I would really recommend it. It's